And we're live.
This is Plant Daddy Podcast, serving you intersectional horticulture. I'm Matthew.
And I'm Steven. Okay, we are back with another Minisode this week, focusing on a single trending plant that we're excited about right now. This week we're going to talk about Brassavola nodosa.
I kind of have to say that it's not really like a trending plant necessarily.
Yeah, it's not.
But we want to talk about it anyway because this is one of the kind of perfect orchids if you're thinking about indoor houseplants, and it is really popular among orchid people, and I feel should be a part of everyone's collection.
I totally agree.
Yeah. So, Steven, tell us what it is and why it's interesting.
All right. So this is a hardy, fairly commonly available orchid. I think it's a great next step after maybe Phalaenopsis or some of the other orchids that you find at grocery stores or see super commonly.
And I think it might even be a good first orchid if those like really cultivated hybridized ones just aren't your jam. If you're not into that particular kind of orchid, I think this might be it instead.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to grow a straight species, which you can find. Maybe there's, some
have to
different
seek them
cultivars
out.
And everything, right? You think you have to seek these out?
Well, you have to seek out most orchid species, particularly
Agreed.
because the plants that are on the market are almost exclusively hybrids that are either intergeneric hybrids or within its own genus, but they've been cultivated for a very specific look and style and even some features like extended hardiness, etc. But Brassavola nodosa is grown looking like it looks in the wild.
Yeah, it's a great straight species, like we're saying. It also has a wonderful evening fragrance.
It's my favorite.
Yeah, so this is one that I think we've touched on this before. I'm not a huge flower person. I'm not really driven by that when I'm selecting plants. This is a fragrance and a flower that even I get excited about. I really like how it makes even the area where it is smell. You don't have to kind of stick your face in this one or anything when it's blooming to smell it.
Yeah, like it can scent a whole room if it has several flowers open at once. And Steven says that he's not a flower person, but he's also not like a fragrance person. We've had this conversation about how I use like scented candles and fragrant plants like to kind of curate a atmosphere in my apartment, and he's like, yeah, I don't even notice that's not even a thing that registers for me.
A little bit.
So the fact that this is a plant that he noticed specifically for its fragrance tells you something that it's kind of a special one.
So yeah, it could melt my icy heart even regarding fragrance.
So Steven, when did you first start growing it, and how did it come into your life?
So this is a plant that kind of happened to me a little bit. So I went to I think it was an Orchid Society sale at the Volunteer Park Conservatory. That's a local conservatory here in my neighborhood in Seattle. It was one of the last orchids left. It was on this really pretty mount that just kind of spoke to me, actually, like a curvy, interesting piece of wood. It was kind of clinging precariously, all the stuff that I kind of like in plant aesthetics otherwise. I talked to the people there thinking, all right, this is, one of the last ones left. There must be something wrong with this. I didn't come here, shopping for orchids necessarily. I just stumbled upon this sale. But they said, oh yeah, this is pretty easy to grow. And as Matthew just revealed, he was there, which I didn't remember. But Matthew,
we went to the sale together.
Yeah, so you were also telling me, oh, this is a pretty easy one to grow. So I took this. I'm like, all right, I've never tried a mounted plant before, I think, ever. So I took this home, kind of hung it by a light, I want to say, or maybe a window. I'm not even sure if I had grow lights at that point. But just, looked up some information online, watered it a couple times a week. I was trying to soak it. I think at this point I was trying to grow air plants as well. So I sort of lumped it in with that. I'm like, oh, it's like growing on a knot in a pot. So I just sort of soak it at some point. Anyway, very kind of early in my plant keeping. But it bloomed, I want to say, a couple months later, and I really was so kind of happy with it, so happy with myself, right? And it's one of those examples of like, if you get a little reward early on, then you kind of get hooked.
Proud.
Yeah. So how about you, Matthew? When did you start growing this?
I first encountered this plant for sale in Massachusetts, of all places. I was visiting my first boyfriend, now my ex, and we just went into a garden center, and I happened to see this orchid available. It was a little seedling in a 2-inch pot, so it was years from blooming, but it had been on my list of orchids to get for quite some time.
So why was it on your list?
Well, I actually have kind of a history with this plant, like I do a lot of them. When I first encountered like a photograph of Brassavola nodosa, it did not impress me.
Yeah, and I think this one kind of has this possibility for some people. I'm going to say it that way. Like, it's not the showiest flower, right?
Well, but on the other hand,
I think it is great, but it's just not going to speak to every single person. Like,
the attitude that I have now is this is one of the most understatedly elegant orchids.
I would agree.
It is so minimalist and just beautiful in its architecture. I think that it's worth taking a minute to just describe the plant because we haven't done that yet. And this might be one that people are not familiar with. Basically, the plant itself, this is a relative of the Cattleya orchids. It's within that whole complex. So you'll know that it's a sympodial plant that has a leaf atop of a pseudobulb. The pseudobulbs are almost not even a proper pseudobulb, though.
Yeah.
They're very pencil-like, which is kind of the same with the leaf. And the leaf may be, they're always very fleshy, but they may be long, narrow, and very pencil-like, or they may be more flat. Sometimes they're slightly wider, but
they're never like Phalaenopsis wide, like a paddle kind of look at all.
They're always very thick and fleshy, kind of like some of the really fleshy Sansevieria that are popular now. They're almost like green beans, you know? So,
but attractive. We're saying attractive.
And they usually kind of all jut upright, and the papery sheaths that were on the lower part of the stem, the not quite pseudobulb, they kind of offer this like contrast to the silvery dark green kind of grayish foliage. They have a lot of roots that they grow out that are white with the green tips that are very exposed, and so you can see them more.
But it's not really grown for foliage, right?
No, like people don't think of this as a beautiful plant.
Yeah.
What makes them amazing are the flowers. So these are produced at the apex of each pseudobulb, and they'll have a spike that has like 2 to 8, maybe more flowers.
Which is a sore spot for both of us, which we will get into later.
Yeah, this is a very easy, reliable bloomer, but we have things that we'll discuss.
Yeah.
The flowers themselves are up to 4 inches wide, and they're very light, airy, and star-shaped. The sepals and petals are all the same, except for the main lip, the labellum. That is kind of extended out in a little tube, and it has a very large heart-shaped kind of
like a scoop to me a little bit. It's not the flat sort of Phalaenopsis look that you may be more familiar with if you're just starting to kind of get deeper into orchids, so to speak.
Yeah, this is a very three-dimensional flower.
Yeah.
But it's very spidery and airy. The flowers are kind of white, cream, to sometimes pale green. They may have little, very small purple or dark red spots inside of the lip in that little tube structure. But the fragrance starts happening in the evening as it begins to get dark. And it's like an extremely heady, rich gardenia with a little citrus to it. It's my favorite floral fragrance, hands down.
I think it's my favorite as well, actually.
Yeah, it's spectacular. It's the only fragrant plant that I have that Brian has commented, like, oh, what is that? I really like that smell. Yeah. So anyway,
So it was on your list for that reason, for the smell?
Well, yes, but also it took me a long time to appreciate the aesthetic of this plant because just like we've said, we just told you what it looks like. That's very different from the moth orchids, the Phalaenopsis, or the Cattleya that it's more closely related to that have those lurid ruffled flowers that are gigantic and they're like lavender and pink, white, like all those really vibrant colors that you'll see as like corsages or something. So I was really kind of like, this plant's fine. Like, its leaves don't look that amazing. It's kind of sad and grassy looking when it's out of bloom. The blooms themselves, I don't like the spideriness of them. there were just a lot of things that there were many better orchids. And then my taste improved as I got more experience and just kind of exposed myself more into the orchid world. And this is all like when I was a teenager that I had these thoughts. So basically, I just decided that it was indeed special and unique enough that I needed to get it.
Yeah, to me, it's not a cliche orchid look.
Yeah, not at all. This is a very unique looking plant.
Yeah, it's great.
But fast forward then, I'm in Massachusetts, 2010, buy this plant, try to get it back through the airport, have to tell the guys, no, it's not drugs. They literally unpacked my suitcase, like, because of this plant, and I almost missed my flight, but whatever. Brought it home, and I potted it up, and I was very, very careful with it because I really wanted it to bloom. It was the first seedling that I ever bought with the intention of growing it to a mature flowering plant.
Okay.
And so it lived in a clay orchid pot with drainage holes in the side, really coarse textured medium. And I gave it the brightest light that I could, so either a south windowsill or it spent time on my summer balcony. It actually at one point got stepped on by a roofing contractor when it was out on the balcony. So it got repotted. Eventually, it became a really dense, mature plant that had tons of new growth points, and it bloomed for the very first time with dozens of flowers. It was spectacular, knocked me on my ass with how rich and potent the fragrance was.
How long did you have to wait?
It was like
A couple years?
maybe 4 years.
Okay.
Like
That's a commitment.
I was impressed that it came around that quickly
So this
for
plant
me.
is part of his family, is what he's saying.
Yeah, this is a very important plant to me.
Yeah.
I do not know, though, if it is a pure species Brassavola nodosa. It might be a hybrid that is Brassavola nodosa heavy,
Okay.
because like it gives every physical indication of looking like a B nodosa, but I'm not certain. I do have another plant that is like a known pure B nodosa. That one's growing mounted on cholla wood. It started as a seedling. It is not.
Oh, and I'm just going to
yet.
correct you. It's cholla wood.
Oh,
Because we're going to
thank you.
get, I know, because, just before Miles
Yeah.
reaches out. Yeah.
I also had somebody give me a note on an Instagram caption where instead of var something, my phone autocorrected it to VS versus in a scientific name, and they very helpfully were like, "You did that wrong."
Okay.
So we might.
All
cut
right.
that.
So you've been growing this for a while then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we both have spent years with this plant.
Yeah.
Just that's kind of unique. I don't think we grow that many of the same things for this long.
There's a very small amount of overlap in the plants that we both want. And so like between the Darlingtonia and Semnopenthes, Pingicula, I think that the only orchid that we both share is the Brassavola.
I think that's true.
Yeah, and it's one that we both appreciate for the exact same reasons, which is really funny.
Yeah,
because,
so this is a 2 thumbs up.
Yeah,
Okay.
Steven and I both prize completely different aspects of plants.
Yeah.
This one gets both of our thumbs up. But so you were talking about how you grow it mounted. Tell me more about what this process is like, because as we know, it's different from just growing things in a pot.
Yeah, so this was a long sort of learning curve for me. Luckily, the plant is forgiving enough that it put up with a ton of different conditions, tons of moves, but this is basically what I've learned from this one. I give this as high light as possible here in Seattle. I put this pretty close to a grow light. I guess I don't put this directly under a grow light, but it's off just to the side to one that is on for 17 hours. It's also in a west-facing window, so it gets a little bit of sun at the end of the day. I tend to water this really as often as I can remember. And it's important to point out that, with a mounted plant, you get more leeway this way as far as overwatering goes. Right?
You basically can't overwater them.
Yeah, which is, I think, more forgiving. So I don't know about, like, if you had it potted up, you can speak to this later, Matthew, like, if it's potted up, what is your schedule like, or what do you look for? But for me, it's really like I could drench this every day. What I end up doing is spraying it with a spray bottle. I just kind of make sure the outside of this wood is soaked. Maybe this wood is about, I would say, 12 inches long.
It's just like a piece of driftwood, basically.
Yeah, and there are roots kind of all around it, but I just let this root as it would. It has, air roots. It has roots that, I think are trying to dig into the wood and the moss a little bit as well. But I would say that I don't water this in an unusual unusual amount. Like I don't drench. I guess I drench it once a week, like under a faucet for a while. But yeah, so that's kind of how I'm treating that. So like lots of light, kind of lots of water. It gets to dry out. I would say that sometimes I think it's too dry, right? Or I'm like, oh no, I forgot to, water this for a couple days. Is it going to crash? It never does.
It's a really dependable one.
Yeah, this is really
It's
taken,
hardy.
yeah, a lot of
tough.
heat, a lot of dryness, a lot of water. Yeah, but some basic. I guess there's some things to know about mounted plants. Maybe we can get into that at some other episode at some point. But really, this one I think is an easy one to start with mounting. It was for me.
Yeah, and if you're listening to the cultural parameters that Stephen has and thinking, well, that sounds just like most of the neotropical epiphytic orchids, you're not wrong.
I think that's right.
Like all of the Cattleya, all of the Laelia, the Encyclia, like they're all plants that are closely related in the Cattleya alliance, and they all come from areas where they get very bright light in canopies of jungles or on outcroppings of rocks, and like they get an extreme of a dry period of half the year and a wet period the other half. They're very good with dealing with drought. They have those thick, fleshy, like really tough leaves because they're totally willing to go dry for a long period. If you're growing them inside on a mount, you can water them as frequently as you have patience to because it's just like tropical rains.
Yeah.
But the roots are all exposed, so they get to dry immediately just like they would in the wild. Your home humidity is going to be lower than they would have in like coastal areas of Central and Northern South America. So they're never going to just stagnate and rot if you're growing them on a mount indoors. That will happen if you grow them in a pot, though.
So that's how you're caring for yours, right?
Yeah. So that original plant that reminds me of an ex who never thinks of me is a plant that I absolutely adore, and I don't ever want to lose it. But I had a lot of trouble with it when I moved apartments. I lost a lot of orchids in that move because they'd gotten like so accustomed to our old space.
Yeah. See, that's, I would say, the one time I have lost leaves on this is if I've really changed conditions. I'm just like, oh, I'm going to put it over on this shelf on the other side of this window now, things like that.
Yeah,
so,
and it's not like they're getting like fussy and sulky to the level that a calathea or ficus does.
Okay.
But you can definitely see when the plant is less happy. So I saw that this plant was less happy. It had been in that pot for so long that the substrate was very broken down. I'd been afraid to repot it because I just wanted it to be a beautiful specimen, but it was old enough that the like central growing point that was once the seedling that I bought, that was all dead and dying back because it was so old. So I had several plants in the pot together that were all like offshoots of that original baby.
Okay, wow.
So when I repotted it, I tried to separate them, and it was just so stressed with the move and everything that I only have one of them left, but it is actually in bloom right now, and it's the first bloom that it's had in quite a number of years.
It's wonderful. A spike with a lot of buds. Right?
Yeah, like it's a plant that is growing one new lead after another, but just in a train. So instead of it growing multiple side shoots like the original plant did to create like a bushy specimen plant that has multiple mature growths blooming at the same time, it just has one new growth with one flower spike, but there's 6 flowers on it. They're smaller than I think I remember them being the first time, but that could just be a function of how long it has been since it last bloomed and how long it took to reestablish itself after that trauma period that it went through.
Okay, so is this in like terracotta? Is this in clay pellets?
It's a terracotta pot, but I repotted it like 2 years ago, which was before I was like super duper on the expanded clay pellet train. So it is bark with some sphagnum and some charcoal and some really coarse perlite because I want it to be light and airy, but also moisture retentive. Because, just like you said, this is a plant that when it's actively growing, I find that it likes a lot of water. It does not want the roots to sit in it. But when I had that baby seedling and I was growing it up, I just put its clay pot with the same medium that I'm using now in like a plastic saucer, and I would just flood it and then just continue to do that whenever the water ran down. So, yeah, it's not ideal culture for one of these plants or plants like it to be sitting in water. They tell you not to do that, but I found that I got really good growth that way. Like, I think that it was really successful for the plant. I never had any problems with root rot, but you could absolutely do that. So be very cautious when you're going in that direction, because a strong, healthy root system is what's going to give you the best growth and the best flowers. So growing them mounted is a really good way to ensure a healthy root system. And that's why the cholla wood that I'm using right now, I just stuffed it with sphagnum, put another baby seedling on the outside, and now it's growing roots like into it, around it. They're coming in and out of the cholla wood holes.
That's cool.
Yeah, I hope that one blooms soon. It should be almost blooming size.
Okay. So I guess we both grow this pretty differently. I think that speaks to how adaptable it is and, hardy in my mind.
Yeah, but earlier we did allude to some challenges and frustrations. So, Stephen, why don't you tell me what they are for you?
Okay, so for me, I'm just trying to get this, to bloom with multiple flowers, right? So a spike...
It bloomed recently with 2, right?
Which was... I felt like that was a miracle. Maybe I downplayed it. I'm like, oh, this always happens. Oh, yeah, here's these 2. But usually what happens is a spike will come, I'll get 1 actual flower, and then the rest of that spike will not actually bloom.
Oh,
so,
like the flowers abort?
Yeah, and I had it this time where 2 of them bloomed kind of at the same time. There were, I want to say, 2 additional buds there. One died really quickly, and then one of the buds hung on for another month. It looked like, I was like, okay, is this how this works? Maybe I can get it to bloom later?
Yeah.
I didn't change anything about the care. I was kind of spraying it pretty religiously every day. I would soak it once a week, as I was always doing. I was fertilizing regularly. But yeah, I can never get all of those, to bloom. Even if I guess now I'm at 50% of the buds will turn into flowers. I guess I would like more than
high.
That.
I feel like you should be able to count on it being a much higher percentage.
I thought so too.
Things that can contribute to bud blast, which is what you're describing. And this is something that affects orchids pretty commonly. It affects Hoyas, that's the Hoya's favorite thing.
Really?
Is to drop flowers before they develop.
Great.
It also affects gardenias, and tons of plants will have this problem. And this is usually a sign of some kind of environmental stress or environmental contaminant. So ethanol, if you have a lot of fruit in your apartment or something that's off-gassing, that can make the flowers drop. I know that Phalaenopsis, if they get too dry, if they have too little light, if they have too much light, if they stay too wet, if they get cold shock, if they get too much heat suddenly, all of those things can and commonly cause them to drop. So there's a lot of little problems that might contribute. But because these plants tend to bloom fall and winter, maybe if you're opening your sliding glass door, you're getting cold drafts in that are damaging the developing flower buds.
Really?
That could be it, but I'm speculating at this point.
Yeah. So I'm hearing all this. I'm like, okay, we're trying to have this show about this orchid that we think is easy, Well, so I'm kind of
they are easy. It's just every plant is going to pose its issues and its challenges. These are the ones that we encounter with this plant.
I would say specifically with the temperature drop, that's something that I put in my routine, which I didn't really talk about before. But I feel like when I'm treating my orchids the best, what I'm doing is opening up a window a little bit at night near where they are. In the Pacific Northwest, the nights cool down pretty well for us. And I've just read that a lot of orchids, especially to promote flowering, you want to have a cooler night. So are you saying you think that maybe the cooler night could have inhibited that?
I'm saying that...
And I realize this is kind of guessing, but what's your guess?
But a lot of orchids, and especially the Cattleya Alliance, they do want a nighttime drop in temperature because that's going to be a seasonal change for them.
Yeah.
They grow so close to the equator that it's not necessarily the light amounts, but having a cold period tells them that it's time to bloom. But I'm wondering if maybe like throughout the day when they'd prefer to be between 65 to 80 degrees, maybe if they're consistently getting like a 45-degree cold air draft from outdoors,
Okay.
they really only want to have about a 10-degree difference between night and day. So if during the day they're experiencing like 72 degrees, then if they're cooling down below
Yeah,
50,
okay.
that could be a problem.
All right, so here we are. Like we're talking about finer points right now, and yeah, this is maybe our next step or something on our own, like Brassavola keeping. But just
Yeah.
to reiterate, you will probably get blooms without monitoring this, right? Like we've gotten blooms.
Yeah.
I mean, I have kind of abused this plant. Like maybe you're not going to get this entire spike to bloom or something, but right?
Yeah, and I've had plenty of orchids start a flower shoot, and for whatever reason, it just doesn't come through. You should have better than 50% luck, though, if you've had as much luck as you have with this plant. So there's a lot of environmental factors. One of the stresses that I have is that I have had flower shoots grow up to some extent, and then they've just yellowed and withered before they've even really developed flower buds.
I've had that too.
That's happened a few times. You should just be aware that this is a thing that the plant might be like, oh, it's the time to do this. And then it starts and it's like, yeah, but I'm just not going to. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
So it's still an orchid.
Yeah, like, it's a diva, but like a good one.
Yeah.
One of the troubles that I am having with mine is that I want it to grow more side growth so that it fills out the pot and isn't just like a little parade procession of one new pseudobulb and leaf, like one after another. Because then it's just a straight line cut through the pot with very little fullness, very little chance for new flowers. But a cool thing about this plant is that if it grows like 2 or 3 new growths in one summer in a year, which is what it can easily do, it might bloom simultaneously from all 3 of those new growths, even if they are stacked one in front of the other. That's not a guarantee, but that is a thing that happens with these.
Yeah, I think I've seen that at shows. So
Yeah.
you are being very ambitious, which is cool.
Yeah. But I think that like the best way to get these orchids growing is in conditions where you can wet them down frequently, where they will dry quickly, give them very bright light, just shy of direct sun, keep their conditions like comfortable indoor home temperatures, and you should be pretty well off to getting a plant that will at least reward you occasionally with its flowers.
Yeah, agree. All right, so this is the part of the show where we run through these questions. We're like, why do you think it's trending? Is it here to stay? I don't think this is really trending, right? I think
this is like a perennial favorite.
We're just trending this right now,
Yeah.
or something.
This is, oh my god, I want to say this is my favorite orchid. It's definitely in the top 3.
Okay, it easily is for me too. It's
Yeah,
not
maybe
like
5.
It's not gonna be some showstopper
Yeah.
necessarily, but the fragrance will be.
I personally think that even if this plant bloomed once every 5 years, it would be worth it.
Wow,
Because that fragrance is so fucking stunning. It is so good.
it is an amazing fragrance.
Yeah.
Okay, so is the plant here to stay? I think we've just
It's
answered
been
that.
here.
It's been in
Yeah.
our collections for multiple years.
This plant is called the Queen of the Night orchid, and like it totally earns that name.
So is this available if you're trying to find them?
Well, I have never just walked into a garden center and found one. I have seen them at Orchid Society meetings and orchid sales, and I have seen various cultivars and hybrids that are very strongly parented by B. nodosa.
Yeah.
So it's easy to find a similar plant. If you don't find the straight species, you will be able to, without much trouble, and if you're like good at looking for orchids at shops, you'll find some of the varieties that featured as a parent that may have similar star-shaped flowers. They often contribute spots on the lip to their progeny, even if they themselves don't have much spotting. That tends to be something that comes out in their baby hybrids. They'll often be just as fragrant or close to. The Cattleya Alliance has a lot of fantastically fragrant flowers, so this is a trait that carries over in most of the hybrids used with it. They're easy to find. and
Yeah,
like readily available through online sources.
exactly.
Too.
I think if you go to any orchid seller, almost any orchid seller, they should have these almost at all times, I would think, right?
I kind of disagree,
Really?
and that's only because I have been much more interested in buying and looking for these.
Huh.
You will always find them available on eBay, but I don't know if every orchid place has them because so many orchid people, so many orchid sellers specialize. So like if you're going to someone who's all about the slipper orchids, this
Okay.
probably won't be one that they have.
That's true.
Yeah. But if you're going to a flowering like Cattleya type orchid person, they should have these. If it's a place that just specializes in species, they should have this. Something that I want to point out is that there are a lot of cultivars of this plant, and I'm not going to name them off for you because you'll find them yourself if you're looking, but the leaves may be tall, narrow, very slender, they may be short and fleshy. There's a bunch of different forms of the foliage and plant itself, as well as the flowers, which may be larger or smaller. Some of them bloom many more flowers that tend to be smaller versus some hybrids have, or cultivars really, have few huge flowers. So there's a lot of different ways that this plant expresses itself, and you can always find a cool form of it, which means that you can actually collect just this plant and it'll be fantastic.
Yeah.
All 18 versions of it. I don't know however many versions.
So do we enjoy growing these?
I think it's
I think
clear.
the answer is
Yeah.
yes.
It's like hell yes.
Yeah.
If
So-
I had to cut my orchid population down to like one or two plants, this one would be one that
Oh,
I keep.
yeah. Honestly, if there were only two, for sure.
Yeah.
And it possibly one.
What would your second orchid be?
I really liked that bulbophyllum. That's not a bulbophyllum anymore. It's growing so well for me.
Cirhopetalum?
Sure.
Yeah.
Circopetalum.
Cirhopetalum.
Cirhopetalum.
Cirrh blah blah blah.
Actually, I should post a picture of that.
You should.
Anyway, that one just grows so well for me. I love the mount. It's kind of one of those situations, but
It's a cute little miniature.
yeah. So, yeah, I think that's kind of it for this. Then we really encourage you guys to seek these out. You know, you can find them online for sure.
We've already posted a picture on our Instagram when Stevens were in bloom recently.
Oh yes,
but
we will
I think
post
that
more.
every time that these will bloom for us, we have little photo shoots. So
Yeah.
we'll definitely be posting some more pics of this plant.
And if we could only like bottle up the scent and somehow share it, but yeah, just
if I could
seek
bottle
these
up
out.
the scent, I would save it all for me.
Oh, yeah. Understandably.
Yeah, I'd bathe in it.
Okay, so I think that's it.
Yeah.
Matthew, social media plug for us?
Yeah, I mean, you know it by now, but go on to Instagram, Pinterest, Twitter, Facebook. We're Plant Daddy Podcast. We have actually just revamped our website, which is plantdaddypodcast.com.
Yeah.
And we're really hoping to make it easy to find whatever content you're looking for that we are churning out. If you can go and leave us a review and a rating on whichever platform you're accessing your podcasts, we would love that because it helps other people to find us and other people to listen. Thank you so much for all of the love and support that we've had so far. We super appreciate it. Anything else, Steven?
I think that's it.
All right, well, happy growing, guys.
Thanks.